Remember those days? Remember those days, The Ultimate Fighter? What helped save this sport? Y'all must have forgot. I don't know. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. Some of us did, some of us didn't. One thing that we do know, though, is that this sport has grown massively, due in large part to the fact that Conor McGregor helped put this sport on another stratosphere. And when you have both of those mixing together, working hand in hand, you can get some fireworks. You can get some really good quotable lines, some really good memories to look back on. We know that. 2015, the last season for me of The Ultimate Fighter that really was awesome, between Conor McGregor and Uriah Faber. Both guys chatted it up, talked a little smack. They never fought, despite the scenes in the show where, Conor McGregor said, I asked for this fight, I wanted this fight, I didn't want to do the show if we weren't going to fight. Ultimately, they never fought, but that was the last season of The Ultimate Fighter that really got me going as far as my interest. 2015, guys, 2015. We're sitting here, 2023, we haven't seen a quality season. I mean, maybe the only season that really rivals that season in recent memory was the season in which Cody Garbrandt, flanked by Uriah Faber, fought against, or coached against, and eventually fought TJ Dillashaw. And that season was really only what it was due to the fact that Conor drubbed up that beef between Uriah, Dillashaw. Cody came to the defense of Uriah and Dillashaw then, but then we know what happened after that, right? Cody Garbrandt and TJ Dillashaw had a hell of a rivalry that ended with TJ Dillashaw winning both of those fights. I want to say what's happening, everybody. I'm Ryan Thomas. This is the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. My thoughts on the return of the notorious one, Conor McGregor, taking on Iron Michael Chandler, the fight that I've been asking for, the fight that I wanted, and I'm getting it in an even better format. They're giving me more than what I asked for. What I originally asked for was for Conor to fight Chandler at some point in May, June, July, or August, which is still possible, by the way, still possible, and fairly likely. But now I'm getting it with Conor McGregor back on The Ultimate Fighter, coaching against a guy that I have a ton of respect for and another fighter that I'm a fan of in Michael Chandler. This is the first time, I could say. Maybe not. I'll correct myself. This is one of those times where Conor is fighting against a guy that I really like, where I like both guys. The last time it happened was McGregor versus Cerrone. The time before that was obviously McGregor versus Nate Diaz. I like Nate Diaz a lot. I'm a big fan of his. But Michael Chandler, I've always respected, dating back to his days in Bellator, what he was able to accomplish in Bellator, what he was able to do for Bellator. He put Bellator on a big stage, and he was really the true Bellator fighter. His fights with Eddie Alvarez were legendary. There were wars. And you look at, that was a really long time ago. That was almost probably over 10 years ago now. And you look at what Conor McGregor has had, the career and peaks and valleys, what he's manifested himself into being, from welfare plumber to international global superstar combat sports icon. It's pretty startling when you take a step back. Whether you love Conor, whether you hate Conor, you take a step back from that lens of things, from that side of things, and you say to yourself, holy shit, look what this guy's accomplished. He's accomplished a hell of a lot. He's done a lot for the sport. So when I look at that, I think to myself, okay, we know the losses. We know he lost to Khabib. We know that he lost to Dustin Poirier twice, back-to-back, no less. The last fight we saw him in, he suffered one of the most devastating injuries I've ever seen, let alone one of the most devastating injuries that an MMA fighter could suffer, that only 3 men in the entire history of the UFC have ever suffered. Actually 4. Corey Hill, Anderson Silva, Chris Weidman, and Conor McGregor, and that is the broken, leg bone, broken, fibula, tibula, and that was one that I think Conor's was the worst. Chris Weidman's was really bad, obviously, but I think Conor's was the worst. I've never seen a foot dip like that, and it was really from the low part of his leg up to his knee that he had to have a titanium rod placed in his leg, much like Anderson Silva did, actually. So I really feel that the questions of this fight are going to be so fun to speculate for the next X amount of months. We can chew on this, savor it like a juicy steak at the Black Forge Inn, and we can just say to ourselves, so thankful that this fight is happening, how it's happening, why it's happening now is really important. Both guys are coming off of losses to Dustin Poirier, right? But both guys have been at the top of their own profession in their own organizations. Conor McGregor was at the top of the UFC. Michael Chandler was at the top of Bellator. Obviously, 2 completely different wavelengths in terms of stages, but both are noteworthy, obviously. Both are just as noteworthy. So I think that's really cool. This is like a UFC Bellator fight in a way. I know Michael Chandler's definitely earned his stripes, so to speak, in the UFC, but wondering back then for me when Michael Chandler was at the top of his game in Bellator, thinking to myself, how would he fare against a Conor McGregor? How would he fare against a Dustin Poirier? How would he fare against a Dan Hooker or a Tony Ferguson or a Justin Gaethje? We got the answers to all those questions. And each fight that Michael Chandler has fought in the UFC has been highly entertaining. To say that Michael Chandler is the most entertaining fighter, win or lose, in the UFC right now, I think it's a pretty accurate statement. I don't think that's a bold statement by me. No matter how long you've been a subscriber, from 2016, since this show started, to right now, I think you could say that Michael Chandler has always been a guy that I've talked highly of and hoped that he would come to the UFC eventually. But coming to the UFC and making an impact are 2 very, very different things. The UFC has absorbed so many contracts from other organizations or signed so many other fighters from other organizations. Some have worked out and most have not. Mirko Cro Cop, Wanderlei Silva, those were the 2 biggest names in Pride Fighting Championship, and they didn't really work out for all intents and purposes in the UFC. Win-loss record, go look that up. For both Mirko Cro Cop and Wanderlei Silva, you'd find yourself saying, wow, they were terrible in the UFC in comparison to their Pride careers. The Pride careers are winning 10, 15 fights in a row. In the UFC, they couldn't even get a win. Or 2 wins in a row, at the very least. So, I think those guys did a lot to elevate the UFC when they were in the UFC coming from Pride. Brought Pride eyeballs to the UFC and made the UFC bigger. And that was a different time and a different place. But quite honestly, Michael Chandler, win or lose, and he's lost to Oliveira, he's lost to Poirier, he's lost to Gaethje. You say to yourself, man, this guy is really checked off every single box. He told us that he was going to come to entertain and come to fight and test his mettle, so to speak. And he's done that. Now he gets the biggest opportunity that fighters from 145 to 155 to 170 are asking for. And that brings me to my next point as far as whether or not we see this fight take place at 170. I think we will. I think we should, because Conor McGregor is huge. He's a big guy now. Michael Chandler, he's always been a bigger fighter at 155 in comparison to the rest. He's a pretty muscular build. And he's fought at 170 quite a lot in his career. And he's fared very well. I love when fighters fight at a higher weight class. I love when fighters fight at a higher weight class closer to their weight. I don't really care for the whole weight cutting thing. I've never been a fan of that. You guys know that have tuned into the show since it started. I'm taking it from me, weight cutting sucks ass. It's terrible. So to see these guys potentially do battle against one another at their optimum weight, that makes this fight better. And we know one thing for sure. Conor McGregor is a main event. Michael Chandler is main event worthy. This is a five-minute round fight. Non-title fight, of course. And the winner of this fight is one step closer to prominence again, getting a title shot. The loser of this fight is really on the outside looking in. And if Conor McGregor were to lose this fight to Michael Chandler, I think his career is in jeopardy. This one is really big. If Michael Chandler loses to Conor McGregor, his title fighting days are over, and his career is in this next chapter of soon retirement. I don't want to say this is a retirement fight. Both of these guys could still fight after this fight, but in terms of the implications for their futures, this is one that most definitely has major implications in the careers of both Conor McGregor and Michael Chandler. But I am super pumped for it. I'm so excited. I really can't believe that this fight is going to happen, no less. The Ultimate Fighter, 12, 13 weeks of pure entertainment, the greatest tournament in mixed martial arts, the greatest thing to ever happen to the UFC is the Ultimate Fighter. Without one, you don't have the other. And it's back with the Notorious One and Iron Michael Chandler. And I have a feeling that the trash talk is going to be very, very rampant. We're going to be getting our popcorn ready every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, maybe Monday night. I don't know what night this show is going to be on. They haven't announced that yet. They haven't even announced who is going to be the fighters, whether they're men, women, what weight class. We don't know any of that yet. What we do know is get your popcorn ready. I'm Ryan Thomas. Thank you so much for tuning into this audio edition of the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and anywhere you listen to your podcasts. Thank you for tuning in. See you next time.